HTML, when we talk about semantics, what we mean is that certain elements have actually a meaning or a purpose attached to them. So when we think about a certain HTML element, we should actually not think about what that element looks like as it's rendered on the page, but instead we should think about what that element actually means and what it stands for. So that is basically the definition of semantic HTML. Now, not all elements in HTML are semantic, and actually I talked a little bit about that before here in this element. So the strong element, which makes our element look bold here on the page. So remember how previously I used the B element, which simply turns its content bold, but doesn't attach it any meaning, right? So I explained that before, and so now maybe it makes a bit more sense. So again, by using the strong element here, the text will still look bold here in the browser, but what really matters here is that we now assign some meaning to this content here. We now say that it's a strong content, which means basically a very important piece of content. And the same here for this piece. So this fundamental word here. So again, we use EM for emphasizing this. And so it still looks italic here on the web page, but what we really mean is that we emphasized this word here. So we gave it a special emphasis, and yeah, that's what this element here right now means. Okay, and the same is actually true for all of these elements that we used in the last video. So for example here, this navigation element. All this does is to create a box, remember, which then contains these 4 anchor elements, but visually it doesn't really do anything. All this does is to represent as a meaning that this is a navigation. But instead of using nav, we could also have used a more generic element, which is the div element. So for example, div, open and close it here. And again, visually, nothing will change. And so all this did was to create a new box, but a box without any meaning. So that's what div stands for. So back in the day, before HTML5, we always used divs for every single box that we needed like this on the page. But then HTML5 came around and introduced this concept of semantic HTML. And so now we should only use the div element when we don't want to attach a certain meaning to a certain container. So to a certain like box element on our page. So in this case, we really want this to mean that it's a navigation. And so we use the navigation element for that. Okay, and the same is true for the article, the header, the footer that we have down here. And in fact, it is true even for the paragraph, for example. Because all that this paragraph here and all the other paragraphs really are essentially boxes filled with text. Now the P, of course, does have a semantic meaning. It means that it is a paragraph. But we could, again, use a generic box without any meaning, so this div, and nothing would change visually. Okay, actually something did change here. So we lost some of the white space that we do have around the P. All right, so let's put it back here anyway to the P, because we want it to have some meaning. And of course, we also want the spacing that the browser gives us by default around the P elements. Okay, but the idea that I mentioned still holds, because we could very easily recreate this space here using some CSS later. So if we wanted, we could in fact build the entire web page only out of div elements if we wanted, and then use CSS to style them as we want. But of course, we don't do that. We use semantic HTML to give our elements meaning. Now, you might ask why we actually do that, and there are multiple reasons. And I think I mentioned them already actually. So one of them is search engine optimization, which basically means that search engines such as Google will be able to understand the structure of your content, and therefore they will be better able to analyze what your content and what your web page is all about. Also, writing semantic HTML is extremely important for accessibility, and especially for people who rely on screen readers to consume our web pages. Okay, so I hope that this makes sense, and we will also keep touching on this subject as we go through the rest of the course. But I still wanted to make it very clear from the very beginning that when we think about HTML, we should not only think about how it actually looks like in the browser, but even more about what these elements actually mean and what they stand for. And with that being said, we kind of finished all we had to learn in this section. And so in the next video, we will configure VS Code a little bit more, and then we will move on to 2 final challenges in this section. So don't wait, and let's head over to our extensions panel here. And the first extension that I want to install here is called Image Preview. So it's this one, and I already have it installed. So I just need to click on Enable. Okay, so that's the first one. And what this one is going to do is that here in our HTML, it now displays the small image preview here in this gutter, as it's called. So here we have this one, and then this image here is also right here where we declare it. So where we include it in our code, and this can be extremely helpful sometimes. So that's why I really wanted to show you this one. The next one that I want to show you is called Color Highlighter or Highlight. So it's this one here, and again I already have it installed. I just enable it, and actually this one I cannot show you yet what it looks like because it will only be relevant in CSS, but trust me that this extension is really helpful for visualizing colors in CSS. Next up is an extension called Auto Rename Tag. So this one, and you see it's an extremely popular one once again. So you have to download it and enable it. And then what happens here is that when we change the name of an element, let's say we actually wanted to make this one a div, then you see it automatically also changes the closing one. So the closing tag. Okay. And this again is extremely helpful and makes our life writing HTML a bit easier, because trust me, we need to do this all the time, like changing the element name. Okay. Now another thing that we need to do, or at least that we can do if we want, is to go back to our settings and then turn back on this setting that we deactivated at the beginning of this section. So that's the auto, let's spell that right. So auto close tag. So let's enable this back, because I think at this point you will no longer make the mistake of forgetting a closing tag. And so now we can allow VS Code to do that work for us. So for example, if we wanted to write a paragraph here, then now you see HTML automatically closed that element for us. Okay, but this we don't need. And now we are going to install the most important and the most useful one of all, and that is called Live Server. So it's this one here, Live Server, with almost 12 million downloads, and this one is popular for a reason. So I just click enable here, and so when I go now to my HTML, and let's close this one down. So close down the sidebar. Now down here in this bar, we should have now this Go Live button. Okay, so hopefully after installing this Live Server extension, you can also see this button down here in this status bar. So when I now click this, then it's starting, And we get this message that server is started at this port number here. Let's close that. And you see that it opened a new tab which contains our page, right? So basically it looks exactly the same, but there is one very big difference. So let's say we want to change this here, and I'm going to call it Jonah's code. And now look closely what happens here as I save this file. So I hit Command S now, or Control S on Windows, and you see what happened? It automatically reloaded the page without us having to do anything. So all we did was save the code, and what will then happen is that this page here gets automatically updated. So all the changes that we did here will basically get injected into this page, and yeah, we can then see the reflection of our changes immediately. So I put it back now, hit again Command or Control S to save it, and immediately you see it going back to what it was before. Now, if we wanted to stop this connection once we are done developing, all we have to do is to click down here on this icon here where it says port 5500. And by the way, this port number is exactly what we have here. Okay, so just for the sake of curiosity, this one here means that it's a local host server. So basically it's like you have now a web server on your own computer running, and then we have actually this code running at this port number. And so this port, it's basically like a sub address of your web server. So of the local host server. But this doesn't really matter. What matters is that this now works, and it is really, really helpful for our development workflow. Now, if for some reason you could not make this work on your computer, then of course don't worry. So you can still do it the old way. So basically the way we have been doing it all along up until this point. So you can just open up the file from your file system like we did, and then keep refreshing it manually, right? But we right now no longer need this tab here because we now have our live connection. So we have our live server serving up this page here whenever we do some edits. All right, and with that, we are now ready to tackle our final last two coding challenges in this HTML fundamentals section. Start with the actual challenge. I want to first make some changes to the file structure that we have in this project right now. And in particular, what I want to do is to put all the images into one folder so that I can then show you how we can include the images like this when they are located in a specific folder. So right now, they are all, as we can see here, they're all in the exact same folder as the index.html. And so that's why all we have to do is to declare the name here, and the browser will then find them basically in the same folder as the HTML document. But now let's create a new folder by clicking this icon, and I'm going to call it img, and then I'm going to put all of the images there. So just dragging and dropping them like this. Okay, and so now if we reload the page, and not this one, which is our demo, but the one we're working on. And by the way, this time I had to actually manually reload the page because I had my computer turned off in the meantime. And so whenever you do that, the very first time you come back, you will have to manually reload the page here when you are running the live server extension. Okay, so remember that we installed that in the last video. And so if I do some change here now, then that should probably just work just before. So you see there's some change, and there it appeared. But anyway, you see that now that we have these images inside of the img folder, they are no longer found in the same folder as index.html. So that's why they don't appear up here. So what we need to do here is to change the path to the image now. And that's not a difficult problem. All we have to do is to start a new path with the name of the folder. So that's img and then /. And so here we go. So you see the image appears here now again in this gutter. And so let's do the same thing here. Give it a save. And here are our images back. Okay, so usually we always put the images in a separate folder. And so I thought that was important to show you, especially now before this challenge where we are going to use some more images. So about the challenge, I'm being here back in the demo page. And so essentially what I want you to do is to code on your own this part here. All right. And let me actually show you where that should be in our markup. So in our HTML. And it is right here after the article. Okay. So this section here about the related posts is no longer part of the article. It's also not part of the footer, and so here we will need another element. And this one I will actually write for you. So here we are going to use the aside element. And the aside element is usually used for some secondary information that complements the information in the main part of the page. So in this case, the main part of the page is the article, and then the aside, which is secondary information, is basically some related posts that are related to the article, so to the main part. Okay, now visually many times we use the aside element as a sidebar, but it doesn't have to be that way. Okay, but now about the challenge itself. So you see that it starts here with this heading, so you can experiment which heading is best here. So one of the headings H1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, remember. And then here you see that this is actually a list, right? You can see that because of these bullet points. And so here for this part, you should probably use a list. Now, what we didn't do before was to have multiple elements inside of one list item. So up here, for example, we have the list item, and in there, there's only some text. But you see that here in each item, there's an image, a link, and then some more text here. And that's no problem at all. So inside of each list element, there can be multiple other child elements, right? And so with that information, I think you are now able to build this. Now, finally, just about the images here, that's some more information that you need. They are also in this folder, and they are called related 1, 2, and 3. And the dimensions I want you to give them is 75 by 75 pixels. And now I think I gave you everything, so please pause the video now and take a couple of minutes, 10, 15 minutes maybe, to write up the HTML for this section. So good luck with that, and I see you once you're ready. All right. So hopefully you did this just fine. So let me show you how I did it. And I hope that you start to see how helpful it is that VS Code now automatically closes or HTML elements, right? So the source here is in the img folder and then related 1. Then the alt text, let's just say that this is a person programming. And of course, your alt text doesn't have to be exactly the same as mine. So if your alt text is a bit different, that is not a problem at all. And now we need to close it as well. And so that's the image part. Next, we have a hyperlink, so an anchor tag. And here, the href, which is something that I didn't mention, but hopefully you figured it out, that this is one of the links that should not point anywhere for now. So how to learn web development. And now finally there's some text with the author there. And so we can use a paragraph for that. So by Jonas Schmettmann. Okay, giving it a save. Now it's nicely formatted and it should appear down here. And indeed, here it is. Great. Oh, I'm just missing here the heading actually. So let me go back and put that even before the unordered list. So I'm using an H4 for that. But anyway, let's continue now building our list here with the next list item. And by the way, if you did your code a little bit different from mine, that's really not a problem. What matters here is that you tried writing the code on your own. That is really the most important thing that I was expecting you to do here. So width 75, the height also 75. Then again, a link pointing nowhere. And this one is the unknown powers of CSS. And by Jim Dillon. And I'm not going to check out the result just yet. Let's just finish it. So another image. So the goal of this part here was really to have you practice writing this same code basically, or very similar code over and over again, because this is the only way that this stuff really gets into your brain. So let's call this one JavaScript code on a screen. And again, the width of 75 and the height of 75. And you notice I'm writing this a little bit faster right now because we don't want to waste a lot of time writing this repetitive code. This was really just for you to practice. Is awesome. Finally, the paragraph. Give it a save. And beautiful. So this looks just like in our demo. And we have now all this content that we want to display here nicely marked up in a very logical way. So you might be wondering why we used a list here in this case. And the reason for that is basically the idea behind semantic HTML that I explained a little bit earlier. So if we think about these related posts, we can very easily argue that it is essentially a list of related posts, right? And so if it is a list, we should mark it up in our HTML. So we should write our HTML as a list. And so that's just what we did. Later with CSS, we will then remove these bullet points because they don't make a lot of sense in this context. But even with the bullet points removed, we still want the meaning of this element, so of all of this here, to be a list. But anyway, that's enough for this video. So I really hoped that you completed this challenge and that you enjoyed doing it, even if it took some time. And even if you had to review some concepts from the previous lectures. That's completely normal, and that's exactly how it should be actually. Now, in order to practice a little bit more even, there is another coding challenge coming up, which is completely detached from this project. But it's a really exciting one, so I hope to see you there.